Welcome to Three Guys and an iPad, the only mortgage and real estate focused podcast guilty of charging junk fees. I'm Brian Rieger. I am the co-founder of Content Beacon, and I am joined, as always, by my friend and partner and co-founder at Content Beacon, Mr. Rick Grant. Mr. Grant, how's the weather in Sheboygan
It's
today?
great. It's beautiful here. Good to see you. I didn't get the memo on the junk fee thing.
Well, I'll get to that later. I think.
All right. Okay.
And we've got perfect people here to talk about that, in fact, today. But before we introduce any special guests, we've got to introduce our special third host, and he's joining us from Austin, Texas. He is a 45-year mortgage origination vet, the former Respro president, and a certified mortgage banker. Welcome, Mr. Kevin Breeland.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. Rick, how is everyone today?
Doing great. And how are things in Austin?
Hot.
Yeah.
And getting hotter.
I can only imagine. And we're in June here as we record this. Wait till the real summer hits, right?
That's right. Yeah, we haven't even started summer yet. It's already 100 degrees. So there you go.
Holy cow. Well, we've got some hot guests here today, if I can make a bad transition. Before we get to them, though, this is where I make our shameless plug for Content Beacon. We are, of course, the premier B2B content marketing agency in the title, mortgage, and real estate industry. So if you're a wholesaler trying to reach brokers, warehouse lender trying to get to correspondence lenders, to realtors, you name it, you want to do a podcast like this one, or maybe even better, you want to do white papers, those sorts of things, give Rick or I a call or shoot us a note, and we'd be delighted to discuss what we can do for you. Also, wouldn't hurt if you gave us a thumbs up once in a while. I think we're up to almost a dozen or something like that, so we're really rolling. If you have any guest or topic ideas, please just contact us. All right, on with the show. We've got three friends of the show here today and three very special guests. Our first is coming to us from Catton and Temple, where he is of counsel, and he is Brian Levy, friend of the show. Brian, how are you today?
I'm terrific. Thanks for having me, Brian, and
Cool.
Rick and Kevin. Always good to see you guys.
Likewise, and it's great to have you, Brian. Our next guest, we had so many good compliments and people start watching the show because she was on last time that we brought her back. I'd like to welcome Loretta Salzano, the founding partner with Franzen and Salzano PC.
Hi, guys. Good to see all y'all.
Thanks for joining us again. We love having you here.
Wonderful.
Our third guest has actually agreed to waive his retainer to join us this time. He doesn't do that for many folks. He's probably coming to us somewhere near New Orleans, and he's the managing attorney at Sterbcow Law Group. It is our friend Marx Sterbcow. Marx, how are you today?
I'm still charging you the junk fee.
Fair enough. As long as you don't have to see your retainer, we'll be all right. All right. Well, we mentioned junk fees a couple times already, and we're going to come to those in a moment. But another bit of big news that might have flown under the radar with some of the other things happening this spring, and I want to start with that. I'll let one of the guests fill you in, but essentially a challenge to the CFPB was brought earlier this spring, and the Supreme Court ruled 7-2, I believe, that the CFPB is not unconstitutional. And I guess specifically they were challenging the way it's funded. Who wants to kind of walk us through the details, and then we'll jump into the ramifications?
I'm sure that Marx and Loretta are just really eager for me to take this on because the details of this case, I mean, frankly, if you guys really want to lose your entire audience very quickly, then you'll ask me to actually explain the historical basis by which this case was decided in terms of looking back at the appropriations between Parliament and the Crown in medieval England, which is really where a lot of the sort of the case law on this subject is driven in both the majority and the dissenting opinions. They just come to a different conclusion. But the long and the short of it is that the Supreme Court decided that the funding mechanism by which the CFPB is funded, which is a percentage of the earnings of the Federal Reserve, is a sufficient authorization from Congress in terms of the appropriations clause of the Constitution to enable them to be funded, and what it and it really understanding all of how they arrive there is much less important than what the meaning of the decision is, and where we are now and going forward.
So is this a case, if I remember my law school, what little of it I had, Brian, if the king can do no wrong? Is it something along those lines?
No. Not, I mean, the idea is that you can't create something of funding that is unlimited for the government. It has to be somehow limited by congressional action, and whatever the limits are that are imposed by what the CFPB Act did were constitutionally permissible, even if you may not like the result of what that ends up being.
Marx, you look like you'd like to add something here.
I was going to let Loretta add in.
Well, I mean, it's as Brian says, it's a long, convoluted, complicated argument that we want to make sure there's limits on the funding, and then questions about the control of the president to remove the director for any reason or no reason. But I don't think any of us are surprised that the Supreme Court would let the Bureau stand. And we figured even if for some reason the CFPB were deemed to be constitutional, we'd have to figure out what that means in a way that wouldn't disrupt our mortgage markets and the rules and everything that they've done since they were formed in 2010. So I think it's, while intellectually interesting, perhaps to intellectuals like Brian, I think we're all in, no one's surprised that we're still in the same place where we were.
Yeah.
Interesting. Marx, what about your thoughts?
That was a compliment, Brian, not a slam.
Yeah.
I would say the only thing I think it's just going to increase enforcement from the CFPB. I think they feel like they can now probably loosen up their or tighten their grip a little bit more and go a little harder on different areas, priorities that they had, without any worry about the constitutional thing hanging over their shoulder.
So, Marx, you're telling us the CFPB is pretty much here to stay, and I'm hearing that from Loretta as well?
I think so. I mean, I saw that they were hiring, I forgot the exact number, but it was in a couple of hundred at least, I believe, maybe as many as 300 new enforcement attorneys and paralegals and secretaries and enforcement, support staff for the enforcement division. So you can certainly expect a ramp up in enforcement to take place.
Yeah, I guess I would take a slight issue with what Marx is saying, only in the respect that I think I said this in one of my mortgage musings recently, that they were already dialed up to 11 before, so I'm not really sure how they could become more aggressive. But I mean, they'd already signaled that they were hiring in that enforcement division well over a year ago. Or maybe it wasn't quite a year ago, but they already, made that announcement that they were going to hire all these people. And frankly, it may have even highlighted the issue with the funding, in that, they can just go and hire all these people without any congressional authorization in terms of the funding for that, because they sort of have an independent funding source. So it does highlight the issue and the reason that the case was brought, in terms of the level of independence that the agency has. But I think it was a little bit of a shot across the bow to those folks who would try and, say, well, the entire agency should be shut down, rather than having that argument win the day. And even Justice Thomas, who wrote the opinion, was kind of a surprise that he would fall on that side of the equation. Basically saying, look, the CFPB is here. If you want to challenge them, you can challenge their individual actions, but everything, you can't just say the agency needs to disappear.
Interesting. Loretta, how about you?
Well, I think it's interesting. We have been hearing for years and years, there are more and more enforcement attorneys and more actions coming your way. But still, it's frustrating as a compliance attorney that we're not getting concrete guidance. We're not getting public guidance. Even when they are conducting investigations, oftentimes it's behind closed doors. There's not a public resolution. So while we hate that they're trying to do this regulation by shakedown or enforcement or call it what you will, we still have to, we don't even have anything like that to read the tea leaves to try to govern where they might come out. Instead, we have to try to put together what we hear through scuttlebutt or gossip or the blogs that and public remarks that the CFPB is putting out there. So, we're all getting ready for this enforcement, and maybe all these soldiers are out there in the trenches broadly interpreting the consumer protection statutes, but unless you're a litigator or someone who's really there defending them or responding to civil investigative demands, I think it's hard for all of us who are people like me, who are really just compliance attorneys, to try to figure out how we can understand and shape our guidance to match what they're doing. And, we have some indication of that through the supervisory highlights, but only in a very limited way. So that's why I think we all try real hard to stay connected, try to attend conferences, try to, be looking at all these alternative sources instead of the good old fashioned way about reading the statute and reading the regulation, reading official guidance and public enforcement actions and case law. So it is frustrating to me in many ways. Not that I want them to be out there doing more things, but if they're going to be doing them, let's all get a better understanding about where the bar is. And then let's go drink there.
I'll drink to that.
When you look at what they did here in terms of saying, look, the CFPB is sort of here to stay, I think on the one hand, the industry is going to say, actually, we're sort of glad to hear that, because it would have been some chaos if it threw out everything that they had done, things like TRID, things like the QM rule, ability to repay. I mean, where does that leave us with all the things that they've put into place, which provide structure for the industry to operate in a safe and compliant manner? So, on the one hand, okay, we're sort of stuck with their enforcement and their interpretations, and it's murky. But the other, we do get, some certainty. And then the other thing, sort of in the forward-looking way, I'm sort of expecting the Supreme Court to give us a little bit more ability to challenge their actions and their decisions with some kind of a change to the Chevron deference standard, which is probably a topic for another podcast. I'm happy to come back, guys, by the way. Talk about that.
Always welcome, Brian. Always welcome.
But so that may give us the ability to say to a regulator, gee, we disagree with your interpretation, and we'd like to hear what the judge has to say about it, as opposed to, the judge just saying, well, the regulator decided it, so it must be the law.
Well, I've got another question for you guys. It's a bit of a loaded question. First of all, a quick aside on behalf of Mr. Levy. If you haven't read Mortgage Musings, which is his great blog, and it's mentioned fairly regularly in Rob Crispin, you might notice, but get a chance, take a look at it. Mortgage Musings, and do not forget the footnotes. They're the best part. It's good stuff, and you don't necessarily have to be a lawyer to understand what's in it. So check that out. Next question might well bring a cease and desist into my inbox, but we're going to ask it anyways. Bit of a loaded question for our guests, and I also invite Rick or Kevin to chime in if you'd like to add it. Is this a victory for consumers? Well, as I said, it could bring a cease and desist. We can move along. No,
if you like, I'll add this.
Go ahead.
Is it a victory for consumers? From the CFPB's viewpoint, yes, it is. From mortgage lender or the mortgage industry, I would also give it a yes as well, because whether you like it or not, this issue is now off the table. And so, they're here to stay, it's going to be regulation by enforcement at this point. And to touch on what Loretta said, they're not good on giving clear guidance. They seem to be more intent on giving us regulation based on their enforcement actions rather than their interpretation of what they've written. So at the end of the day, I think it's good because the topic is now off the table and we can all move to something else. And once you get one problem resolved, then you just go to the next one in front of you. And that's kind of how I view this issue.
That's a great perspective. Anyone else want to add anything, or should we move along to junk fees? We've been mentioning them quite a bit.
Just to made in the Obamacare era, if you like it, you can keep it. That's what the consumers get here.
Okay, fair.
If you like your doctor, you can keep them.
Sounds good to me. All right, let's get on to the already mentioned junk fees. The CFPB, of course, has been busy this spring, recently issuing a request for information as part of an inquiry into, of course, junk fees and mortgage closing costs. So who would like to kind of walk us through the what of this, what happened, and then we'll kind of get into the what we think about it.
Come on, Marx. You were touting this early. An early adopter.
On the junk fee aspect, I would say that the Bureau they've conducted a study or research for the last year, trying to try to find some cost efficiencies for consumers in the closing transaction process. And some of those may be credit report costs, title insurance, BPOs for just a slew of things. I think they identified over 200 different fees that they have been looking at. And probably the biggest right now has been title insurance. That certainly impacts the mortgage industry more than anything else. And some of the solutions that they've come up with for alternatives that they're trying to push through to try to put pressure, I would say, on the title insurers to try to create some sort of loan subsidy, low income loan subsidy program to lower their title insurance premiums, because they believe that the premiums are too high. And I'm hearing this from attorney generals now across the country, where they're doing investigations, enforcement actions, and they're looking at the issue of title insurance premium in particular as being a real problem. And whether that's valid or not, the industry pays about $15 billion a year in fixing up the records and also paying out claims. That's a lot of money. When you start whittling away at the title insurance and you're giving people these alternative product types, that is a concerning thing for me from a lending standpoint. If I'm a lender, I'd be concerned about fair lending issues, UDAP issues, and from a consumer, whether they're even going to be protected in the purchase of a home. So,
let's drill down on that a little, Mark. You're kind of leading into and then we'll kind of open it up. Part of the rationale, I believe, that the CFPB is given is that these junk fees and excessive closing costs, they're draining down payments, pushing up monthly mortgage costs, and proving to be otherwise anti-competitive fees. I believe that's the language they used. What do you think about that, Mark? Are these the things keeping costs high right now?
I mean, I don't think it's that. I think it's inflation. I mean, when you have your salaries have gone through the roof, and insurance, E&O insurance has gone through the roof, leases, office leases, everything has increased dramatically. Papers, pens, mops, the whole 9 yards. So you can't obviously costs are going to continue to skyrocket up when companies are being burdened with these higher business costs. The fees are going to increase. I mean, I don't think I ever met a business that's out there to lose money. I mean, they have to make money to keep their people employed.
True.
Yeah,
True.
If I can jump in,
Sure.
You guys, I mean, you can't completely discount this as a sort of a policy initiative, but it's an election year, And we've got a housing affordability issue in this country. And I think the key drivers on that, as Marx identifies, are the housing supply, high interest rates, insurance costs are really limiting, particularly in the South and in the West. And it's something that they can point to. I mean, first of all, shame on the industry for calling these things junk fees at any point, because we sort of brought that on ourselves a long time ago. I think we stopped calling them junk fees internally, but that's sort of stuck. But we're trying to now deal with an administration that says, well, we think all of these things are junk fees that are charged in connection with the closing. And if you ask a person on the street, are you in favor of junk fees? Well, I actually did see a study recently. 90% of the people are in favor of Biden's policy for restricting junk fees. I don't know who those 10% are, but I'd like to sell them something.
Yeah. Well, when you control the rhetoric, you want to have that, right? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Loretta, please.
No, it's preposterous. Many moons ago, there was a huge attack on different fees that were perhaps junk fees. A lot of it was in the servicing realm, and they were things that weren't disclosed to consumers up front. They were added later. They were sometimes added without legitimate services behind them. And to Brian's point, sometimes these terms, they stick. And a lot of the fees that the CFPB is grousing about are actual expenses that are required by the secondary market, which is largely the government. They're fees that are that have been studied and disclosure regarding them, set forth in TRID with various tolerances that are sensitive to those fees that are third party versus lender imposed. And so I think that's interesting. A lot of the public remarks of Chopra have been raising concerns with credit report fees, which did increase greatly from, I think there was a steep increase after a relatively stable, a very long time of stability, and then a large increase. But still, that's a very small amount of the cost of credit in the mortgage business. So, it costs a certain amount to produce the loan, and it's astounding to me with all the technology that cost continues to rise. And to Mark's point, a lot of it has to do with the folks who are employees who are originating these loans, and especially loan originators. But the cost is what it is. And if it's not going to be in the form of lenders passing along to borrowers their actual third-party costs, it's going to have to be priced into the interest rate or other fees somehow. So while it's interesting to think about what really these drivers are and how perhaps we can shape the price in a way that supports the people we want to help get in homes, it's still, we're stuck with all of this structure in a way that we can't be that nimble. And it's interesting, they're asking for all this data, and MBA and others, I'm sure, are scrambling to assemble this, working with the research teams to come up with meaningful ways to shape the dialogue. But at the end of the day, where will that leave us? So will it be another exercise with all of this, the constitutionality of the CFPB, where we're in much the same place we were when we started, but with a huge input of time and energy?
Well, Loretta, you just asked my next question for me. What happens next, folks? This is open to everybody. I'll make it a little specific, but we can talk to mortgage, realty, whatever you like. I know Alta has mobilized on behalf of the title industry to defend itself and the value proposition for title insurance, which is probably the least understood of the various elements of a mortgage. But I'll ask the larger question. What's next? Does this all go away after November, or are we in for some bumpy road?
Well, I think you hit on something, and it's something that at least the government, to the extent that it is the one making lending decisions in Fannie and Freddie and FHA, is certainly looking at whether title insurance is valuable. Is it valuable to the consumer? Is it valuable to the lender? Are there alternatives that are more cheap, more inexpensive, that can accomplish the same thing? And that is something that the title insurance industry is going to need to address. They're going to have to support their own value. And explain why they're not a junk fee, if you will, and that they're really needed and that the cost is appropriate.
I mean, my big question is, what's Alta's message? I don't think I've seen it. I mean, I'll be candid. I haven't seen any messaging whatsoever publicly to the industry. It's been non-existent. And, I think as far as this RFI goes, this is the first step for the Bureau's ultimate goal of looking at and incorporating bundling back into the process. So bundling of fees to where there's one fee, and then the costs will be basically made up through a higher interest rate that the lenders will charge. That to me is what really where this is all headed, and it with a preconceived notion, because the RFI itself was actually very neutral in the language in it. Okay. It was the propaganda piece, the PR piece that they put out on their website that was out of control. I mean, that was everything's is jacking up the price, and it's killing consumers. And it wasn't just the title, but to me, it kind of showed a fundamental misunderstanding or lack of knowledge of the industry and what the industry does and what each component of the industry does. And that's not good for a department that's supposed to be in charge of regulating the industry.
Well, it's either that.
Go ahead, Rick.
It's either that, Marx, or it's a very good understanding of the industry. Now, remember, CFPB just won a major battle in the Supreme Court about whether or not they deserve to exist. In order to remain, they must be absolutely necessary for the defense of the American public. The mortgage industry is a perfect antagonist for this. And so you're going to see a lot more of this. They're going to hunt every way they can to try to make it absolutely clear. Well, we've seen it from the beginning where they said shop with 3 mortgage lenders because you're not going to get a good price if you don't. They've consistently, and this is the problem I have with them, consistently painted the industry in a way that's best for their long-term existence as an agency. And I'm not sure that serves anybody very well.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting about the shopping, we all agree that shopping is good, and we spent so much time on the TRID disclosures to ensure that they're a meaningful shopping tool. And the CFPB did all kinds of consumer testing. So I think it's interesting that, questions 3 and 4 of the request for information focus on shopping and data for that, and the extent to which we as industry participants have and can provide that data. As a lawyer who's counseling clients on LO compensation all day long, I'm hearing I have to reduce my price to meet competition, which indicates consumers are shopping. Now, I don't know how many people that is they're shopping with to the extent they really are and how that works, but that was what we went through with TRID. And even though this is about junk fees, they're still looking at the same data points about shopping because, one doesn't necessarily correlate to the other.
I think there's a couple things happening here.
Yeah.
You have an agency that designed a consumer protection regime around disclosure of these fees, and in precise detail told you exactly how to disclose it to the consumer so the consumer could shop. That's the TRID rule. And this rule was designed to enable shopping. If you try and put it all into a bundle, not only do you need to change the regulations to enable that to occur, but you're also changing your philosophy around how to best protect the consumer. And so I think there's some schizophrenia going on at the CFPB about, well, maybe disclosure is not really the best way to do it. We're not happy with it, so let's try something else. But back to Rick's point about the agency knowing what they're doing. I mean, they just published a study in connection with this junk fee initiative that pointed out how much points had increased from 2021 to the 2022 to 2023 period, because consumers were paying more in points to lower their interest rates. Well, because interest rates were going up, but they just pointed out how much the points had increased, and it didn't seem to understand that was good for the consumer because they lowered their rate over a longer period of time in a rising rate environment. very interesting lack of kind of understanding there. And I guess that I heard from a political pundit who said that there was 2 Russians who were speaking to each other in the Cold War era. And one said to the other, if you see a Bulgarian, beat him. We'll know why. We, in the mortgage and settlement service industry, we're the Bulgarians.
Well said. Well said.
I mean, I'll add one thing onto Brian, and you know, that lack of understanding of the industry, and I say this, and it's a criticism, but it's an issue that the Bureau needs to contend with too, and that's educating their own staff as to what the industry that they're regulating, what the rules are, and how it actually works. I mean, I had some enforcement attorneys in one case that we represented trying to force a mortgage broker to create a loan subsidy program. And then they couldn't get over the fact that a mortgage broker couldn't create their own loan subsidy program. I mean, that to me is a fundamental lack of education within the Bureau, where you have people that are in charge of, in some of these enforcement areas. There's some really smart people there. Don't get me. I mean, there are some really sharp people there, but you have some other knuckleheads over there that really shouldn't be. They shouldn't be in government, or they need to be really. They need some significant education. So
hey, Marx, maybe one of them can help you with hanging up art instead of just putting it on your couch.
I got it yesterday.
Well, I'm still shaking my head that we're using the term bundled fees again, tell you the truth. I thought we'd put that to bed for good. We're going to start to get ready for our final approach here, folks. Any final thoughts on the junk fee issues? Where are we going with this?
I would say 2026 at the earliest is when you'd probably see all this kind of play out. And that's if Biden gets reelected. If 2026, I know that a number of the trade associations, the mortgage bankers, and certainly the American Bankers Association are going to litigate this thing. In fact, I was talking to Rod Alba the other day, and he said, the American Bankers has gone from an advocacy group to more of a litigation association where they're litigating against the Bureau and others on a constant time right now. But that's where I see this. This is not something that's going to happen overnight, but they are setting in motion that bundling piece. If Trump gets in, I think that this will die quickly on the vine.
Well, I think it could just be, like you say, it's laying the foundation. It took, I don't know how much, 2 decades for us to have disclosure reform by combining TILA and RESPA when we first started talking about it. And so maybe this will be something like that we will have some kind of fee reform or fee structure reform, but it'll take a few rounds and goes, and having both the industry and consumer advocacy groups working together to make that happen.
Well, folks, I think at this point, I'd like to thank all of our guests today. And of course, all 3, Brian, Marx, and Loretta, you probably have seen them speak at a conference near you. You may be seeing them again. Any of you have any speaking gigs coming up in the next several weeks or this fall that you'd like to promote?
I'm sad to say, guys, I'm heading off to Hawaii next week to speak at the Hawaii Mortgage Bankers, but it's also my wife's 60th birthday, so we're turning that into a birthday trip as well. So,
well, happy birthday!
Wow. That
So
sounds awesome.
I don't know many things, Brian, but I would say this: disclosing to 12 people that your wife just turned 60. I hope you have more than just a trip in mind while you're there.
And when you're taking marital advice with Kevin,
I didn't say that. You said that. I didn't say that.
You might want to take her to a few nice restaurants, maybe a Prada store, those kinds of things.
Trust me, Kevin.
That's a lack of education. That's an example of a lack of education.
Yes, right there. That's a great example. This is junk fees talking right here.
Marx, Loretta, how about you? Anything coming up in the near future? And of course, I mentioned Brian's Mortgage Musings. Please check it out if you haven't. Anything this fall for either of you as well, or anything you'd like to plug?
We'll share the MBA, reg compliance, absolutely. And I think I'll be taking more vacations and conferences right now.
Well,
Yeah.
sounds good to me. Sounds good. And of course, Marx, I know you recently spoke at NS3. You've been doing your fair share of speaking this year as well, right?
Yeah, it's been out of control. So I think I was on the road almost 6 straight weeks. The only thing I have, I'd say the only thing, I'm sure there's more on my calendar, but the only thing that's coming at the top of my head would be Respro in DC.
Of course.
And I will say, if Phil Schulman's watching this, I will pay off the bet when I go to DC.
On that note, folks, we would thank our guests again. I also thank my 3 guys, Kevin and Rick. To you watching, if you have a topic idea, want to be on the show, want to see someone on the show, just touch base with us. And while you're at it, hit the thumbs up, if you would, on the YouTube channel. Well, with that, if one of the lawyers wants to stick around for a few minutes, looks like we've got an RFI of our own in the Content Beacon inbox. With that, we'll see you next time.